My son Ricardo approached his wife Isabella and wrapped his arm around her waist. On his face was a cold determination I could never understand. He took the microphone and addressed the crowd, my friends, my neighbors. We are giving our mother the greatest gift: peace. We have reserved a wonderful place for her at the Tranquil Meadows Nursing Home. Her belongings have already been sent there. Tranquil Meadows. That place on the other side of town, the one with the bad rumors. For a moment, I felt my ears ringing, the scent of cinnamon filling the bakery replaced by a pungent smell of burning. They thrust the brochure into my hand. On the cover were elderly people sitting in chairs with fake smiles, the shadow of loneliness cast upon their faces. Isabella snatched the microphone from her husband's hand. Her voice rang out triumphantly. Of course, the legacy of La Mariposa Dorada will be in safe hands. We are now taking over this place and will soon give it a modern face as Bella's Bites. These words hit the walls of the pastry shop, filled with 70 years of memories, like a slap. Just 10 minutes earlier, this had been my paradise. Every corner of La Mariposa Dorada was decorated with wooden butterfly carvings made by my late husband Mateo's hands. That day, it was ringing with the joy of my loved ones gathered to celebrate my, Elena Vargas's, 60th birthday. My son Ricardo, my only son, looked into my eyes and said, "Mom, you deserve the very best." When I looked at him then, I thought all the hardships, the sleepless nights, and a life of sacrifice had been worth it. What a fool I was. Now I looked at the faces around me. I saw the pain, shock, and helplessness on the faces of my neighbors, my friends of 40 years. I searched for Ricardo's eyes, my only son's eyes. But there was nothing there. No love, no regret. Only the cold, empty glint of greed and ingratitude. At that moment, in my own bakery, in front of my own friends, I realized I had been cast aside by my own son, like an outdated piece of furniture. This was not a gift. It was exile. This was not a celebration. It was a public execution. I was left alone, beneath the rubble of my own life. The irony of the name Tranquil Meadows was like a poison seeping into the soul. There was no tranquility here, nor lush, green meadows. Only a helplessness mixed with the smell of disinfectant, the ghosts of abandonment wandering slowly through the corridors, and the mournful patter of rain on the windows. I was standing in the room they brought me to after the party, the public execution of my life. Calling it a room would be generous. It was a cell consisting of 4 pale walls, a metal cot, and a plastic cup on a nightstand. The warmth of my own home, my bakery, the scent of cinnamon and vanilla, the comfort of the wooden butterflies on the walls, it all felt so distant, as if it belonged to another universe. I was still reeling from the shock of that moment. My son's voice echoed in my ears. We are giving our mother the greatest gift, peace. What peace? This was the name of exile, of being ignored. Isabella's triumphant smile wouldn't leave my mind. Bella's bites. This tasteless, soulless stain on La Mariposa Dorada, which my husband and I had created with our blood, sweat, and spirit. My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. I couldn't breathe. I clung to the edge of the nightstand, and as my fingers gripped the cold metal, I noticed something in my palm. In all the commotion, I didn't know when I had picked it up, but the shiny brochure they had handed me was now crumpled in my hand. I squeezed it, the edges of the paper cutting into my flesh. The pain was nothing compared to the ocean of betrayal I felt. How could I have misjudged my son so badly? My Ricardo, my mijo. Had he never seen what I sacrificed to raise him, to give him a future? Or had he seen, but not cared? My mind traveled beyond the walls of this cold, unfamiliar room, journeying through the corridors of the past, among my monuments of sacrifice. Each memory was now a disappointment illuminated by today's cruel reality. The first stop in my mind was 25 years ago. My Mateo, my beloved husband, the pillar of my life, the soul of the bakery. With his hands, he shaped not only dough but also our dreams. He was strong, like a mountain. It never crossed my mind that that mountain could one day crumble, but that relentless disease, like a fungus that rots even the strongest oaks from within, had begun to envelop his body. First came fatigue, then unrelenting pain, and finally the diagnosis delivered in the doctor's icy voice: lung cancer. After that day, the world became a different place for us. Even the warmth emanating from the bakery oven couldn't melt the terrible chill inside us. Hospital corridors, chemotherapy sessions, doctors' faces oscillating between hope and despair became our new home, our new landscape. And the bills? Ah, those bills. They were like an avalanche, rolling down on us, growing a little bigger every week. Our insurance only covered a small portion of the expenses. The rest was on our shoulders. One night, while Mateo was sleeping, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the pile of papers in front of me. The numbers danced before my eyes, as if mocking me. We were exhausted. We had spent our last penny at the hospital the week before. That night, I woke up to Mateo's moans. His face was contorted with pain, his breathing raspy. Seeing him like that felt like 1,000 shards of glass piercing my heart. In that moment, I understood. Pride, memories, possessions, none of it mattered. Only his breath mattered. The next morning, as the first rays of sun awoke San Antonio, I had already made my decision. I quietly took the jewelry box from the bedroom. Inside were the pearl necklace from my mother, my engagement ring, the sapphire earrings Mateo had bought me on our 10th wedding anniversary, and many other memories. Each had a story, a life lived. But compared to the new days Mateo would live, they were all so meaningless. My stomach churned as I entered the jeweler's shop, or rather the pawn shop, in a less safe neighborhood of the city. Among the faded gold in the display cases, I saw the helpless woman reflected in my own image. The old, bespectacled man, examining the jewelry I placed before him with a pair of pliers, seemed to be weighing my soul as well. He set my mother's pearls aside. "These are fake," he said emotionlessly. I knew he was lying, but I didn't have the strength to argue. The price he offered for the others was less than a quarter of their real value. But at that moment, that money was a fortune to me. My hands trembled as I took it. When I left the shop, the emptiness I felt in my fingers and around my neck was not just the loss of the jewelry, but also a part of my past. But it wasn't enough. Medicines, private doctors. The expenses never stopped. Next was our car, a red, old-model Chevrolet. I remember the day we first bought it. Ricardo was only 5 years old, screaming with joy in the back seat. We had gone to so many places in that car: picnics, seaside towns, Ricardo's school plays. That car was the wheeled version of our family album. The idea of selling it was like selling a part of myself. I didn't tell Mateo when I put the ad in the newspaper. He found out one evening when the buyers came. He got out of bed and came to the window. As I shook hands with the car's new owners and handed them the keys, I saw Mateo's reflection in the window. He was trying to hide the tears streaming from his eyes. That night, when I sat down next to him, he whispered in a strained voice, "Forgive me, Elena. I put you in this position. I've been a burden to you." I held his hand, calloused, but to me the most precious hands in the world. "Don't talk like that, mi amor," I said. "We are a family. We are a team. Your breath is more precious to me than all the jewels in the world, than all the cars. We'll start over, as long as you're by my side." I believed this with all my heart as I said it to him. And we started over. Mateo outlived the 2 years the doctors had predicted. Those 2 years were our stolen time. 2 priceless years we bought with the money from the jewels and the car. When he died, I had nothing left in my hands. Only the love he left me, the bakery's debts, and a son I had to raise. That day, I understood that sacrifice was my destiny. After Mateo's death, La Mariposa Dorada became my refuge, my pen, and my battlefield. At 3 in the morning, before the city woke up, I would light the oven and knead the dough with love, just as Mateo had taught me. Keeping his dream alive and not letting Ricardo feel his father's absence was my sole purpose. Ricardo was growing up. He was a smart boy. His eyes sparkled with his father's dreamer's light. When he graduated first in his class from high school, my chest swelled with pride. The day he came home with the acceptance letter from that great university in Austin was one of the happiest days of my life. But that happiness gave way to deep anxiety when I learned the school's annual tuition. The figure was astronomical. The bakery's income was barely enough for us to get by. Saving that kind of money was impossible. I saw the excitement fade from Ricardo's face. "Never mind, Mom," he said one evening. "I'll go to the state college here. I'll help you at the bakery." Something inside me snapped at that moment. I couldn't allow him to be confined within these 4 walls like me. He had to spread his wings and fly toward opportunities that neither his father nor I had ever had. I had made a promise to Mateo. Our son would study and become a great man. The next day, I put on my best clothes and headed to the bank. The young man in the loan department looked at his computer screen and said the bakery's income wouldn't cover such a loan. His voice was so mechanical. "I'm sorry, ma'am, our risk analysis is negative." I begged. I offered to put the bakery up as collateral. I put Mateo's keepsake, our house, everything we had on the table. Finally, they approved an education loan with high interest rates and unforgiving terms. As I signed the contract, I felt like I was selling a piece of my soul on that paper. But it was worth it. For Ricardo's future. After that day, my life changed completely. I was no longer getting up at 3 in the morning, but at 2. I started making not just bread and pan dolce, but also special orders, wedding cakes, and cookies for birthday parties. I spent my days at the bakery and my nights wrestling with the accounting books. Sleep was a luxury for me. My hands were calloused from kneading dough and holding hot trays, covered in burn marks here and there. My youth was melting away in that oven's heat. On weekends, while women my age were out with their families, I would nap for 10 minutes on top of the flour sacks. Ricardo had started college. At first, he called often, then his calls became less frequent. When he did call, it was usually to ask for money for new books or for a spring break trip with his friends. I never said no. I cut back on my own meals, sometimes getting by on just a bowl of soup or coffee, but I always sent him the money he asked for. I didn't want him to fall behind the others. I couldn't bear the thought of him being crushed in that glittering world. Once he asked, "Mom, how are you?" I was so surprised that for a moment I didn't know what to say. "I'm fine, mijo, I'm fine." Just study hard was all I could manage. He didn't care how I was. He cared about what I could do for him. Back then, I ignored that. Let's call it the blindness of a mother's love. 4 years passed like a lifetime. At Ricardo's graduation ceremony, as he threw his cap in the air, I watched him through tears in the crowd. He had made it. My son had made it. All those sleepless nights, all that exhaustion, seemed to vanish in that moment. He could now fly with his own wings. I'll never forget the day I paid the last installment of the loan. I went to the bank and made the final payment. When the girl at the counter handed me the "your debt is paid" document, there was no celebration, no ceremony, just a quiet, weary relief. That evening, I sat alone in the bakery. I picked up an old photo of Mateo. "We did it, Mateo," I whispered. "We saved our son's future." Little did I know that while I was building his future, he was laying the foundation for plans that would destroy mine. Ricardo had found a good job after college. He was building a life for himself. And then Isabella entered his life. The first time he brought her to the bakery, I felt a vague unease. Isabella was beautiful, stylish, but there was a calculating look in her eyes, devoid of sincerity. She glanced around the bakery. "How authentic," she said. She used that word like a hidden insult, somewhere between condescension and flattery. She looked at Mateo's hand-carved woodwork as if it were old junk. That day, she didn't let go of Ricardo's hand for a moment, like a guard trying to protect him from my love, from my world. Their relationship progressed rapidly. A few months later, they decided to get married. When I heard the news, I tried to be happy, like any mother would. But that happiness gave way to worry when the wedding plans began. Isabella wanted everything to be the most expensive, the most extravagant. A guest list of 1,000 people, the ballroom of the city's most luxurious hotel, a wedding dress brought specially from Paris. When I told Ricardo that this was too much, that they could have a more modest but meaningful ceremony, my son raised his voice at me for the first time. "Mom, this is Isabella's dream. I can't disappoint her. Besides, she has a wide circle of friends. This wedding will also be an investment in my career." "An investment in your career?" I said in surprise. "Son, that's not what marriage is about. Marriage is a promise between two people, not a show." That's when Isabella stepped in. Her eyes filled with tears, her voice trembled. "Mrs. Elena, I understand. Maybe things were different in your time. But I just want the most special day of my life to be perfect. If this bothers you, then maybe we shouldn't get married." It was a masterful chess move. She had positioned me as the obstacle to her son's happiness. Ricardo immediately took her side. "See, Mom? You've upset her. We just want your support, that's all." I was cornered. Either I would do what they wanted, or I would lose my son. At the time, I couldn't see that I was already beginning to lose him. I couldn't sleep that night. I thought about that small fortune I had set aside for retirement, which I had saved up after Mateo's death, scraping and saving. I was going to travel the world with that money. I was going to see Italy and Spain, the places Mateo and I had dreamed of visiting. But my son's happiness and career were more important, weren't they? I convinced myself of that. The next day, I told them I would cover the wedding expenses. The fake mask of sadness on Isabella's face vanished instantly, replaced by the satisfied expression of a hunter who had caught its prey. She hugged me. "I knew," she whispered in my ear. "I knew what a kind-hearted mother you were." That hug was as cold and deadly as an anaconda wrapping around its prey. The wedding was a complete circus. Everything was just as Isabella wanted it, extravagant and soulless. In the expensive crowd, I was like a ghost in the simple navy blue dress I had sewn myself. Isabella's friends whispered about me as they passed by. Ricardo's mother, I think. The baker, I could feel their contempt right down to my bones. As a wedding gift, I gave them a check for the last money I had in my bank account. Their thanks were perfunctory. That night, while everyone was dancing, I sat on the sidelines and watched my son. He was holding Isabella's hand, looking into her eyes. But in that gaze, there was no Ricardo I knew, no Ricardo I raised. There was a stranger, a puppet of a greedy woman. At that moment, I realized I had lost not only my money, but also my son. He now belonged to Isabella's world, and in that world, there was no place for a self-sacrificing, old-fashioned mother like me. The sound of the rain stopped. The silence in the room was now heavier than the noisy memories of the past. I opened my eyes and looked again at those 4 pale walls, at that metal bed. Everything was now in its place. This was not a decision made in an instant. It was the final act of a betrayal plot woven thread by thread over many years. My sacrifices were just resources for them to exploit. My love was fuel for their ingratitude. My tears had dried up. The deep sorrow inside me was giving way to something else, something cold, hard, and sharp that I had never felt before. This was not the rage of a woman at the bottom of despair. This was the determination of a woman who had lost everything but refused to lose her honor. I had made another promise to Matteo. We will start over. My son and daughter-in-law thought my story was over. But they were wrong. This was not the end. It was just a painful, long beginning. And I, Elena Vargas, would write the end of my story with my own hands. The initial shock of betrayal is like a knife plunged into the body, sharp, sudden, and burning. But the real pain begins when that knife is inside. Slowly, with every breath, every heartbeat, it makes its presence felt, poisoning every organ it touches and seeping into the deepest corners of the soul. My first week at Tranquil Meadows felt like an endless stretch of time, with that knife slowly turning inside me. If despair had a smell, it would smell like these corridors, a mixture of bleach, stale food, and the peculiar, sour scent of a death that has been postponed. The room they placed me in seemed to have forgotten what it meant to have a soul. The yellow stains on the walls were like a map of the countless tears shed and unheard prayers of those who had occupied it before me. The window was covered with thick iron bars resembling fingerprints and looked out onto the cracked concrete floor of the courtyard. There was no grass, no greenery here. The bed creaked painfully with every movement I made, as if it too was tired and fragile like me. I shared my room with a woman in her 70s, whose name I learned was Sophia, a woman whose eyes had lost their light years ago. Sophia had said one sentence to me on my first day. "Stop waiting, my girl. No one is coming." At the time, I thought these words were cruel. Now, however, I understood that it wasn't cruelty, but the first and most important lesson in survival learned within these walls. I spent my first days in a trance. I lived with the foolish belief that this was all a terrible misunderstanding, that Ricardo, my mijo, would come and rescue me from this nightmare. Every time a door opened, every time I heard footsteps in the hallway, my heart would race. "Here he comes," I would tell myself. "Now the door will open and he'll say, 'Mom, forgive me, we made a mistake.'" But those who came were always tired nurses, surly orderlies, or another lost, lonely soul. Ricardo never came. On my fourth day, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. Sophia had told me that the payphone at the end of the corridor was our only connection to the outside world. Even getting there was a struggle. Everyone waited by that phone for a glimmer of hope. When it was my turn, I dialed Ricardo's number, which I had memorized and written in my palm with trembling fingers. I held my breath as I listened to the phone ring. Each ring felt like a hammer blow to my heart. And then his voice. "Hello, this is Ricardo. I'm not available right now. Please leave a message." Voicemail. Even my son's voice now belonged to a stranger. Mechanical, emotionless. I took a deep breath. "Ricardo, my son. Your mother." I whispered into the receiver. "I'm here, at Tranquil Meadows. There's been a mistake, mijo, I know. Please, please come get me. Please, my son, don't leave me here." My message ended in a helpless sob. When I hung up, I saw the row behind me looking at me with silent, understanding eyes. Everyone here had lived through or witnessed this scene many times before. Hours passed. I sat near that phone all day, waiting for a call back. But the phone never rang. The next day, I tried again. This time, the phone picked up on the second ring. "Hello?" It was Isabella's voice. The last shred of hope inside me trembled at that moment. "Isabella? It's me, Elena," I said hurriedly. "I need to talk to Ricardo. Can you please give him the phone?" There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Then came Isabella's voice, dripping with fake compassion. "Oh, Elena. How are you? We hope you're getting used to it there. The doctors say the first weeks are the hardest. Getting used to it? I asked incredulously. Isabella, what are you talking about? This place is like a prison. Where is Ricardo? I need to talk to him. Isabella sighed. Her voice suddenly hardened like a teacher's. Look, Elena, Ricardo is very busy right now. The bakery's takeover, the renovations. He's under incredible stress. There's no point in upsetting him more, for your sake, for his sake. You both need some time. Are the nurses giving you your medication? You need to take it regularly. I don't need medication, I shouted. I need my son. Now you're getting emotional, Elena. That's not good. We'll call you later, he said, and click. The phone was slammed in my face, the receiver in my hand. I just stood there. We'll call you later. What a big lie. But I didn't give up. The next day, early in the morning, hoping Isabella might be at work, I called the home phone. I was lucky, Ricardo answered. Hello? Ricardo. Thank God, I said, crying. It's me, son. Please listen to me. But his voice was cold and distant. Mom? Why are you calling? Isabella told me everything. She said you were causing trouble. Causing trouble? I moaned. Ricardo, you put me in a nursing home. You took away the bakery I devoted my whole life to. You call that causing trouble? I heard him take a deep breath. Mom, we did this for your own good. You're old now. You can't take care of yourself. That's the safest place for you. I can't take care of myself? My voice trembled with anger. I took care of both you and that bakery all by myself for 15 years. I can't take care of myself? This is Isabella's idea, isn't it? That snake got into your head. Speak properly about Isabella, he shouted. She's my wife. And she made me see the truths I couldn't see. You were always tired, always forgetting things. What if you'd left the oven on? What if there had been an accident? We had to take responsibility. It was all lies, excuses, cheap fairy tales they made up to justify their own betrayal. I begged desperately. Son, don't do this. You're making Mateo's bones ache. Please, I want to come home. That's your home now, Mom, he said in an icy voice. You have to accept it. I have to hang up now. I have a lot of work to do. And for the second time, the phone was slammed in my face. This time, it hurt even more, because this time, it was the direct voice of my own flesh and blood's betrayal. I tried one last time, a few days later. I called Ricardo's cell phone. It went to voicemail. I called again, still busy. Third, fourth, and then that voice. The number you have dialed is currently unavailable. He had blocked my number. He had blocked his own mother's number. At that moment, I understood that the wall of silence was complete. I was inside, they were outside, and I would never cross that wall. As I put the receiver down, I knew I had lost not just a phone call, but my last connection to my son. Life at Tranquil Meadows was built on small, humiliating deprivations. Soap was rationed, the toilet paper was poor quality, and the food was tasteless mush. After a few weeks, I realized I needed some cash to buy myself better soap and at least a packet of biscuits from the canteen. I only had a few dollars left in my wallet. My bank card was on the nightstand. One of the nurses, Maria, was a young woman who seemed more compassionate than the others, with a sparkle left in her tired eyes. I explained the situation to her. I want to buy something from the canteen, but I think I forgot my PIN, and I don't know how this machine works. I lied. Can you help me find out how much I have in my account? Maria looked at me with sympathetic eyes. Of course, Mrs. Elena, she said softly. She took me to a small office at the end of the corridor, where there was a single computer that rarely worked. She logged into the bank's website. After entering my card details, my heart was pounding as I waited for the screen to open. After spending from my retirement savings for the wedding, there should still have been a considerable amount left. It was a safety net I had set aside for my own old age, for hard times. When the page loaded, my breath caught at the number on the screen. This, this can't be, I stammered. The account balance was only $217. Maria opened the account activity, thinking there must be a mistake. And there it was, in all its cruelness, the financial record of the betrayal. The day after the party, a withdrawal of $50,000 had been made from my account under the name Tranquil Meadows Nursing Home admission fee. The amount itself was unbelievable. A place like this could never cost that much. But that was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, money was withdrawn almost daily. Private nursing service, $1,500. Medical consultation fee, $2,500. Living space improvement fund, $5,000. All of them were fabricated, all of them inflated expenses. A living space improvement fund? I laughed bitterly as I looked at the peeling painted walls and creaking bed. They weren't just paying for my care expenses. They were systematically plundering every penny I had saved throughout my life with fake invoices they had arranged in my name. This was theft. My own son and daughter-in-law were robbing me not only of my home, but also of my future, my security, everything. "Mrs. Elena, are you okay?" Maria asked anxiously. I hadn't noticed my face had gone pale. "I'm fine," I whispered. But I wasn't. It felt like ice, not blood, was running through my veins. I kept staring at the screen. My eye caught on one last transaction. 3 days ago, a $7,000 purchase had been made at a luxury boutique bearing Isabella's name. With my money. With the money I earned working at the oven in the dead of night, my hands calloused. That woman was buying herself expensive clothes. At that moment, I fully understood what helplessness meant. I was trapped, not just emotionally, but financially too. I had nothing left. I didn't have the strength to hire a lawyer, to seek justice. I was left at their mercy within these 4 walls, and they had no mercy. I thanked Maria and slowly returned to my room. I lay down on my bed and started staring at the ceiling. I couldn't even cry anymore. My tear ducts had dried up. There was only a huge, cold emptiness inside me. The bottom of despair is not the moment when you think everything is over. The bottom is when you realize you still have something to lose. And then you lose that too. For me, that moment came in the TV room at Tranquil Meadows. This room was a gathering place for the living dead. Most of the residents spent their days staring blankly at the constantly on television on the opposite wall, sitting in their wheelchairs or old armchairs. The noise and chaos were like an escape from painful realities. I would usually sit there in a corner, letting the meaningless sounds around me numb my mind. That day, the local news channel was on. The anchor was presenting a news series titled "Changing Faces in Our City." It usually didn't interest me, but the image that appeared on the screen at that moment froze my blood. There it was. My bakery. La Mariposa Dorada. The camera showed the front of the shop, but something was wrong. A scaffold had been erected in front of it, and 2 workers were trying to remove my sign, that wonderful wooden sign Mateo had carved with his own hands. They had a crowbar wedged against the wings of the golden butterfly. There was a creak, then a crack, and the sign that symbolized my life, my love, fell noisily onto the sidewalk like a wreck. The wood was splintered, the golden butterfly split in 2. As tears streamed from my eyes, the camera turned to the cheerful announcer. "Yes, this historic corner of San Antonio is getting a modern facelift thanks to Isabella Vargas, a young and dynamic entrepreneur." And then she appeared on the screen. Isabella. She was wearing one of those expensive dresses that I was sure had been bought with my money. Her hair was perfect, her smile radiant. She took the microphone. "Thank you," she chirped. "This place has been neglected for years, its potential untapped. We, Bella's Bites, are bringing new life, new energy here. There's no room for old, dusty recipes anymore. Our menu will be filled with flavors that appeal to modern tastes, with international influences. We are determined to make this corner the most popular meeting place in town." Abandoned, old and dusty recipes. The work of my life, Mateo's legacy, had become a pile of rubbish in his mouth. He spoke as if we had never existed, as if that bakery had never had a soul or a past. He was trampling on my legacy, my memories, and selling it as a success story. At that moment, all the sounds in the TV room disappeared, the murmurs of the other residents, the noise of the television. It all turned into a hum and then vanished completely. Only that image remained, my shattered sign lying on the sidewalk and my triumphant bride shining on the screen. This was worse than a physical attack. This was the execution of my soul. They hadn't just taken my home, my money, and my son. They had stolen my identity, my past, my husband's memory, and destroyed it in front of everyone. The golden butterfly was dead, and with her, the last glimmer of hope inside me had also faded. I don't remember how I got up from the chair I was sitting on and went to my room. I only know that I lay down on my bed and disappeared into the darkness of the ceiling. I heard Sophia's worried voice asking, "Are you okay, my girl?" But I couldn't answer. There was no me left to answer, just an empty shell. They had won. They had completely defeated me. This was the bottom of despair, a silent, dark, and absolute void, and in that void, there was nothing left to fight for. The bottom of despair is not a noisy place. It is silent. It is colorless. It is a limbo where time flows thick as syrup, where every second is identical to the one before. After that day when I watched the collapse of La Mariposa Dorada on television, the execution of my husband's legacy, I became a resident of that limbo. Days and nights became meaningless voids, separated only by the changing pale light seeping through my window. My soul seemed to have left my body. My existence was nothing more than a pile of flesh that breathed, lay in bed, and stared blankly at the food placed before it. I refused the tasteless porridge brought by the nurses. I felt no hunger. I felt nothing. My roommate Sophia's anxious murmurs, the weary nurse Maria's compassionate insistence, all were meaningless sounds that bounced off the edges of my consciousness and returned. Sometimes Sophia would sit next to me and tell me how her son had forgotten her when she last saw her grandchildren's faces. She tried to connect by merging her pain with mine, but I couldn't respond. My pain was so immense that it left no room for another. It was like a black hole collapsing in on itself. At night, instead of sleeping, I drifted in a twilight zone of consciousness. Even with my eyes closed, the only thing I saw was that shattered sign and Isabella's triumphant face. These images were projected onto the walls of my mind, replayed over and over. Ricardo's voice kept saying, "That's your home now, Mom." That sentence was a manifesto of betrayal. This situation could have lasted for weeks, maybe months. Perhaps I would have slowly melted away in that bed, becoming just another nameless resident of Tranquil Meadows. But one night, a dream created the first crack in that thick layer of indifference. In my dream, I was in the bakery. Everything was as it used to be. The air smelled of vanilla and freshly baked bread, and the wooden butterflies on the wall seemed to be fluttering their wings. And Mateo was there. He was young and strong, just like 25 years ago. He was smiling. He didn't say a single word. He just stood in front of the oven, looking at me. But in his eyes, instead of the usual love and admiration, there was a sadness, a disappointment I couldn't describe. It was as if he was saying, "Is this it, Elena? Is this your response to this insult to our legacy, to our love? Just lying there and waiting?" I woke up drenched in sweat. My heart was pounding in the stifling silence of the room. Mateo's imaginary face, those disappointed eyes, were etched into my mind. For the first time in weeks, I felt something. First, deep shame. What was I doing? I was letting them win. I was allowing them to erase our lives, our story, to have the last word. I, Elena Vargas, was the woman who sold everything for her husband's illness, who sacrificed her nights for her son's education. When had I become so weak, so defeated? At that moment, in that deep void inside me, a tiny, trembling flame ignited. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was rebellion. It was the last shred of resistance in my soul, refusing to surrender to my fate. When I got out of bed, my head spun. My legs were so weak I had to hold on to the nightstand. In the bottom drawer of the nightstand lay the only tangible thing left from my life that they had allowed me to bring with me, an old cigar box from Mateo. Inside were the memories of a lifetime. I took the box in my trembling hands and sat on the edge of the bed. When I opened the lid, a familiar scent of the past, reminiscent of mothballs, hit my face. I had nothing better to do. I had nothing left to lose. Perhaps it was time to say goodbye to what was inside that box, to my past. I reached into the box. Each item was the key to a memory. The first thing I touched was a yellowed photograph of Ricardo taken when he was 3 years old. He was smiling on his little red bicycle, missing his front teeth. I remembered that moment as if it were yesterday. He had fallen in the park and skinned his knee. When I picked him up and kissed him, his crying stopped immediately. He knew he was safe in my arms. How had that innocent child turned into the man who chose a stranger over his mother, locked her away in a nursing home, and plundered her inheritance? I gently set the photo aside. That child was dead. Then I noticed the velvety texture on my fingers, a dried burgundy rose. The rose Mateo gave me on our first date. He was so shy back then. "It's not as beautiful as you are, Elena," he stammered. That rose had been tucked inside my favorite book for 20 years. Now, however, it was fragile and faded, just like my dreams. But when I smelled it, for a moment I remembered Mateo's young, hopeful self, that first excitement. It was a bittersweet memory. Then my fingers touched cold metal. Mateo's old, bone-framed reading glasses. I imagined him so clearly. Sitting at the kitchen table in the mornings, newspaper in hand, those glasses perched on the tip of his nose. Every now and then he would look at me over his glasses and tease, "Elena, mi vida, what wonders will you create in the oven today?" I squeezed the glasses in my palm. It was as if they still held his warmth. As I moved toward the bottom of the box, my finger caught on a rough surface. It was a carved piece of wood, a small butterfly. It was Mateo's first prototype, made as a trial before he created the large sign for the bakery. One of its wings was slightly flawed. For years, I had kept it in front of the kitchen window. When the sun hit it, it created a flickering shadow play on the wall. Now, looking at that small, flawed butterfly, I thought of the larger one, now broken. My eyes filled with tears again. The bottom of the box was now visible. As I reached to put the items back, I felt a bulge under the lining of the box. Curiously, I lifted the lining. There, forgotten by everyone, perhaps unknown to anyone, lay something, Mateo's old, worn leather wallet. I hadn't seen it in 10 years. After he died, I had put his wallet in this box just as it was. I had never dared to open it. It was like the last bastion of his privacy. But now, what did I have left to lose? When I took the wallet in my hand, the familiar old smell of leather reached my nose. My fingers traced the stitches worn down by the years. I opened it slowly. Inside were a few old bills, a dry cleaning receipt, and a black and white photo of me that I had given him, taken when we were in our 20s. The edges of the photo were worn from being kept in the wallet, so he had carried it close to his heart all these years. The section of the wallet for paper money was empty, but as I rummaged through the card slots, I noticed a pocket behind one of them, like a secret compartment. I felt it with my fingertip. There was something hard inside. I slowly pulled it out. It was an old, yellowed business card. On it was writing, the ink slightly smudged, Hector Morales, attorney. Below that was an address, now belonging to an old part of town, and an old 7-digit phone number. Hector. I remembered that name. He was Mateo's closest friend from the army. He had graduated from law school and handled our minor legal matters for a while. But then, I think about 30 years ago, they had a falling out for some reason. He never mentioned him again. I couldn't understand why this business card was still in his wallet. Just as I was about to throw the card back in the box, I turned it over. And there, I saw the sentence that changed everything. A note written by Mateo in his familiar, decisive handwriting in faded ink. Si alguna vez la mariposa pierde sus alas, llama a Héctor. Él tiene la verdadera llave. If the butterfly ever loses its wings, call Héctor. He has the real key. I read the sentence over and over. My heart began to beat faster than normal for the first time in weeks. If the butterfly loses its wings. That was exactly my current situation. My sign was shattered, my bakery taken from me. The butterfly had lost its wings. The real key is with him. What key? What did that mean? A safe key? A secret? A will? My brain, numb for weeks, suddenly sprang into action. Mateo was a smart man. He was far-sighted. He had always seen Ricardo's weak character, how easily he could be influenced. Perhaps he had sensed such a betrayal, such a possibility, years ago. Perhaps this was a helping hand he was extending to me from beyond the grave. This was not a glimmer of hope. It was a spark in the pitch-black darkness, a feeble, trembling flame that could go out at any moment. But for the first time in weeks, I was seeing something other than darkness. But then reality hit me like a slap in the face. Who was I? An old woman, penniless and powerless, imprisoned in Tranquil Meadows. Was there even a Hector Morales anymore? Was he alive? Was this address still valid? Did this phone number still work? And most importantly, how would I get there? I only had a few dollars in my pocket. In my bank account, the $217 they had graciously left me. Doubts and fears immediately tried to crush that newly sprouted seed of hope. "This is stupid," said the voice inside me. "It's a pipe dream. Sit where you are. Accept your fate." I got up and walked to the window. I looked at my reflection in the glass. The woman I saw horrified me. She was a woman with sunken eyes, white, disheveled hair, slumped shoulders, a woman who was finished. The woman Isabella and Ricardo wanted to create. The woman they defeated. The woman they destroyed. Then I thought of Mateo's face in my dream, those disappointed eyes, and Isabella's arrogant smile on television. Number. That woman was not me. She would not be me. Maybe this business card would be useless. Maybe Hector Morales was already dead. Maybe this was just a meaningless note from an old man. But I wouldn't know unless I tried. Giving up without trying would be handing them their victory on a silver platter. I couldn't do that to Mateo's memory, to my own honor. I had made my decision. That spark inside me had now turned into a small but determined flame. My plan was simple and dangerous. I had to get out of here. I would wait for the morning breakfast hour when the nurses were busiest. I put on my best outfit, the navy blue dress I had worn when I arrived here. It was wrinkled, but I didn't care. I put Mateo's wallet and that sacred business card inside it in my pocket. I also took my bank card. My heart fluttered in my chest like a bird as I left the room. I walked down the corridor slowly but with determination. No one paid any attention to me. I was just one of the invisible old people here. The nurse at the reception desk was talking heatedly on the phone with a patient's relative. She didn't even glance at me. When I pushed the heavy metal door, the cold morning air outside hit my face like a slap. The fresh air, which I felt for the first time in weeks, burned my lungs. I hesitated for a moment. It would have been so easy to turn back, to seek refuge in the safety of that familiar hell. But I didn't. I took a step forward, and the door of Tranquil Meadows closed slowly behind me. I was free, but I was also penniless, alone, and terrified. I walked to the nearest payphone and dialed a taxi stand with trembling fingers. I gave them the old address on the business card. When the taxi arrived, I sat in the back seat and, as the car moved, I looked back one last time at the gloomy building of Tranquil Meadows. The me inside and the me outside were no longer the same person. The woman inside was hopeless. The one outside, with only a faded business card and her husband's whisper in her hand, had set out toward the impossible. As the taxi left behind San Antonio's modern glass and steel facade and headed toward the old neighborhoods that held the city's memory, each mile marker brought me closer to my past. The sterile, soulless suburb of Tranquil Meadows gave way to buildings that carried the texture of time, each crack holding a memory. This was the area where Mateo and I had built our first home, where Ricardo had learned to ride a bike. I hadn't delved this deep in years. As I watched out the taxi window, I felt I was traveling not just to an address, but also to an Elena I thought I had forgotten. My heart pounded against the bars of my ribcage like a prisoner. What if Hector Morales had moved? What if he was dead? What if this business card was just a meaningless piece of paper forgotten in my husband's wallet? As these questions invaded my mind like ants, I clutched the small piece of cardboard in my palm as if it were a lifeboat. The taxi driver looked at me through the rearview mirror, his mustache twitching, and asked, "Are you sure about this address, ma'am?" "I haven't brought a passenger to this street in years. All the big lawyers have moved to those new towers by the river now." His voice was like gasoline fueling my doubts. "I'm sure," I said, careful not to let my voice tremble. "Please continue." Finally, the taxi stopped in front of a 2-story, red brick building that stood like a dignified old man. On a brass sign, faded by time, were those magical words, Morales and Sons, Law Firm. Sons. So it had continued. So there was hope. My legs trembled as I handed the taxi driver my last money and got out. When I pushed open the building's heavy wooden door and stepped inside, I felt like I had stepped into a time machine. The noise of the modern world outside instantly ceased. It gave way to the peaceful silence of old wood, leather-bound books, and the ticking of a grandfather clock. This place felt like a sanctuary where honor and tradition still meant something. The young woman sitting at the reception desk looked me up and down. With my wrinkled clothes, messy hair, and tired face, I probably didn't fit in with the standards here. "How can I help you?" she asked, a forced politeness in her voice. "I want to see Hector Morales," I said. The woman looked at her computer screen. "Mr. Hector doesn't see visitors without an appointment. Also, his schedule is completely full today. If you like, I can get you an appointment with one of the younger Mr. Moraleses for next week." "No," I said firmly. "I can't wait. This is very urgent. Please tell him Elena Vargas is here, Mateo Vargas's wife." The woman paused for a moment when she heard Mateo's name, but she was still hesitant. She was just about to refuse me when the mahogany door behind her opened and an elderly man appeared. He must have been in his 70s, but he still stood tall. His silver hair was carefully combed, and his intelligent eyes were as sharp as an eagle's. Those eyes scanned the waiting room before settling on me. For a moment, a look of surprise flashed across his face, then that surprise gave way to recognition and deep concern. "Elena?" he said, his voice both surprised and compassionate. "Elena Vargas, is that you?" Ignoring the woman at the reception desk, he walked over to me. "My God, it's been years. But you don't look well. Come in, please come in." He gently took me by the arm and led me into his office. His office was like the rest of the building. The walls were lined with books up to the ceiling, neat stacks of papers sat on his desk, and there was a faint smell of cigars in the air. He sat me down in one of the comfortable leather chairs opposite his desk. "Bring me a coffee, Maria," he said to the woman at the reception desk, then closed the door and turned his full attention to me. "I haven't seen you since Matteo's death, Elena. It's been over 20 years. Now please tell me, what brought you to this?" At that moment, in that room, under the reassuring gaze of that fatherly man, everything I had kept inside for weeks poured out like a flood. Between sobs, I told him everything. The 60th birthday party, that cruel surprise, the humiliation at Tranquil Meadows, the unanswered phone calls, my blocked number, my ransacked bank account, and the final blow, the sign for La Mariposa Dorada being smashed on TV. As I spoke, I relived those moments, felt that pain all over again. Hector listened, giving me his full attention, without interrupting me with a single word. The expression on his face changed from compassion to shock, from shock to anger, and finally to an icy, hard resolve. When I fell silent, the room was filled for a moment with the ticking of the grandfather clock. Finally, he hissed, "That ungrateful brat. And that gilded snake. If Matteo had seen this, he would have turned over in his grave." I reached into my pocket with a trembling hand and pulled out that yellowed business card, placing it on the table. The side with Matteo's note was facing up. Hector took the card and read the note for a moment. I saw his eyes narrow. "Ah, Matteo," he whispered. "I never knew a man as clever and forward-thinking as you." So he lost his butterfly wings, did he? He stood up and walked over to a huge old steel safe in the corner of the room. After turning a series of dials, the safe's heavy door creaked open. From inside, he pulled out a thick, burgundy-colored file labeled Vargas Family Security Vault. He returned to the table and placed the file in front of me. "Elena," he said seriously, "what I'm about to tell you will change everything. Please listen to me carefully. 40 years ago, when you and Matteo first started the bakery, I helped you. But a few years later, Matteo came to me, looking worried. Ricardo was a young man back then. Matteo loved his son very much. But he was also aware of a weakness in his character. He was easily influenced, a man who could lose his will in the face of a strong-willed woman. Matteo feared that everything he had built in his life would one day be destroyed by the ambitions of the wrong woman. I held my breath as I listened to him. "That's why," Hector continued, opening the file. "He asked me to do something. We didn't put the title to the bakery, that valuable land and building, in either your name or his. We transferred the ownership to an irrevocable trust that I manage. This file is the trust's founding document." He turned the pages and pointed to a clause. "This trust has one purpose and one condition. The property can be transferred to Ricardo after Matteo's death, can be transferred to Ricardo under one condition, that you sign a document in the presence of a notary without any pressure, declaring with your free and happy will that you are retiring and wish to transfer the bakery's inheritance to your son." My head was spinning. But I signed a bunch of papers at the party," I stammered, "without even reading what they were." Hector smiled bitterly. "It doesn't matter. Those documents are legally worthless. Proving that you weren't acting of your own free will at that moment, that you were under pressure and emotional manipulation, is the easiest thing in the world. Forcing you into a nursing home is a fundamental violation of that condition. In short, Elena, your son and daughter-in-law are occupying property that doesn't belong to them, operating it illegally and trying to sell it. In legal terms, this is fraud." At that moment, the lethargy and helplessness that had held my body captive for weeks evaporated instantly. It was replaced by a burning, pure, and powerful anger, like lava flowing through my veins. I had been deceived. I had been humiliated. But I had not been defeated. My husband, My beloved Matteo had extended a weapon, a shield, to me from beyond his grave. The real key was in this file. My tears had stopped. My gaze had sharpened. I looked at Hector. "What can we do, Hector?" I asked. My voice was no longer a tearful whisper, but carried a tone as hard as steel. "Legally," said Hector, leaning back, "we can file an immediate eviction suit, report them for fraud. Quietly, you can get your property back. The bakery will be yours again." "Quietly?" I repeated. The word left a bitter taste in my mouth. The image from the television flashed through my mind. That shattered sign, Isabella's arrogant face, Ricardo's icy voice on the phone, my public execution. No, Hector. Not quietly. I stood up and began pacing the room. A storm was raging inside me. One part of me was crying for Ricardo, still that innocent little boy on his bike. He was my son, my heart, my blood. How could a mother want her own child to be destroyed? This was my internal conflict. I was caught between my maternal instinct and my trampled honor. But then the other side prevailed. My honor. Honor. My respect for Matteo's legacy. That unforgivable insult directed at me. They hadn't quietly cast me aside. They had humiliated me in front of everyone, reduced my reputation to nothing. They had turned my pain into a spectacle, a part of their own triumph. Justice couldn't be silent. Justice had to be as loud as them, as public as them, and as humiliating as them. I turned to Hector. I looked into his eyes with determination. They didn't just take my home, Hector. They stole my life, my memories, my husband's legacy. And in doing so, they humiliated me. I want to repay them in kind. I want to destroy the thing they value most, their fake social status, their money-bought reputation. They should lose everything. Just like me. A momentary look of surprise flashed across Hector's face, then gave way to a kind of respect and understanding. He nodded slowly. "I understand, Elena. I understand. Well, do you have a plan?" It was at that moment that the first seeds of my revenge plan began to sprout in my mind. "Yes," I said. "I think I do. They're going to reopen the bakery under the name Bella's Bites, right? The news mentioned a big opening party, a party where they'll invite all the city's important people, investors, the press." Hector's eyes lit up. "A perfect stage," he said. "The moment they think they're celebrating their victory will be their own guillotine." From that moment on, Hector's office became our war room. We began to map out the steps of the plan one by one. Hector hired a private detective, an old police acquaintance. The detective's task was simple: track Ricardo and Isabella's every move, find out about the real estate company they were trying to sell the bakery to and the details of the deal, and most importantly, get hold of the date and guest list for that big opening party. Hector mobilized the young lawyers at the law firm: eviction notice, trespassing lawsuit, qualified fraud complaint, unauthorized access to my bank accounts and embezzlement. A separate file was prepared for each crime. Everything would be conducted in complete secrecy until the big day. This was one of the most critical steps in the plan. The detective had brought the name of the buyer company, Stonewall Properties. It was one of the city's largest and most aggressive real estate development companies. Hector said, "If we talk to these guys directly, they might warn Ricardo. We need to get them on our side." A few days later, Hector arranged a meeting with the company's legal department on behalf of an anonymous client. I attended that meeting too. Hector had bought me new, simple but stylish clothes and arranged for me to stay in a clean and safe apartment he had found for me. I no longer looked like that helpless old woman. At the meeting, when we sat down across from Stonewall's arrogant lawyers, Hector calmly placed the trust fund documents and the original deed on the table. The look on the lawyers' faces was priceless. They too realized they had been duped. To protect their company's reputation, to avoid a scandal, they would do anything. Hector made them an offer. If you help with our plan, my client won't sue you. If you don't, you'll be held accountable in front of the press, not only for being accomplices to fraud, but also for victimizing an elderly woman. The choice was simple. They instantly became our allies. A week later, the detective arrived with an invitation detailing the party's date and location. Bella's Bites, grand opening gala. It was 2 weeks away. That gave us enough time to prepare. For those 2 weeks, I was no longer Elena Vargas. I was the general of Mateo's revenge. We worked for hours in Hector's office. By examining my bank statements, we found documentation of every luxury purchase Isabella had made with my money. The detective uncovered that they had even used forged documents for the loans they took out to renovate the bakery. The extent of their betrayal was even deeper than we had imagined. The mother inside me, that loving woman, was not completely dead. At night, in that quiet apartment Hector rented for me, there were moments when I cried thinking about Ricardo's childhood. But when morning came, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The woman I saw was no longer crying. In her eyes was a steely determination. The day before the party, Hector and I went over the plan one last time. Everything was ready. He had spoken to a commissioner he knew from the police department and ensured that an official team would be present at the party to evaluate a report of fraud. The CEO of Stonewall Properties would be there in person and declare the deal invalid in front of everyone. Hector put his hand on my shoulder. "Are you ready, Elena?" he asked. "Tomorrow night, we're embarking on a path of no return. Your son's life will never be the same again." I took a deep breath. I thought of Mateo's disappointed face in my dream, and then the note on the back of that business card. "The real key is with him." "I'm ready, Hector," I said. "The butterfly will reclaim its wings." That night, a velvety darkness had fallen over San Antonio, but at the corner where my old bakery used to be, a fake daylight was shining. Ricardo and Isabella had rented such powerful projectors for the opening of Bella's Bites that our modest neighborhood resembled a Hollywood premiere. From inside the car we had parked at the head of the street, I watched the scene with cold calm. Hector, sitting in the passenger seat, placed his hand on my arm as if to comfort me. "There's no turning back now, Elena." "Are you sure?" Without taking my eyes off that flood of artificial light, I whispered, "I've never been so sure of anything in my life." My bakery. I didn't recognize it anymore. Mateo's handiwork, the warm wooden facade, was covered with tasteless, shiny black marble. In place of the lace curtains that used to bring the warmth inside to the outside, there were cold and distant smoked glass windows, and at the top, the sign that stabbed my soul every time I saw it remained: Bella's Bites. This name, written in pink neon letters, was like an insult written on the gravestone of my La Mariposa Dorada. From inside came muffled, rhythmic but soulless electronic music. Every time the door opened and closed, laughter, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the buzz of a crowd I was never familiar with, a crowd of snobs, spilled out onto the street. They were dancing on the wreckage of my life. "It's time," said Hector. He opened the car door. From the unmarked police car behind us, Commissioner Rodriguez and an officer got out. A few meters away, the CEO of Stonewall Properties, Mr. Sterling, had stepped out of his chauffeur-driven car and was waiting for us with a stony face. Our army was small, but deadly. I wore a simple but dignified midnight blue dress, which Hector had insisted I buy. My hair had been professionally styled for the first time in years. I was no longer the slumped-shouldered, vacant-eyed resident of Tranquil Meadows. I was a matriarch, a queen, come to settle accounts. We walked slowly toward that flood of fake light. With every step, the pain, humiliation, and helplessness of the last few months played like a film reel in my mind. That nursing home room, the unanswered phone calls, my emptying bank account, the shattered sign. All these memories were no longer pains that weakened me, but logs that fueled the fire within me. When we reached the door, a bow-tied attendant tried to stop us. "Your invitation, please?" Hector stepped forward. His face bore an expression of centuries-old authority. "We don't need an invitation," he said in an icy tone. "The owner has arrived." And pushing the attendant aside, he opened the door wide. The moment we stepped inside, my breath caught for a second. The transformation was even wilder than I had imagined. Where Mateo's wooden butterflies had hung, tasteless modern art paintings now hung. My small, intimate tables had been replaced by high bistro tables with oddly shaped sofas. And instead of that familiar, soul-warming scent of cinnamon and vanilla, there was the smell of expensive perfumes, trendy but meaningless food, and most of all, the cold, metallic smell of money. The music was so loud that our entrance went unnoticed at first. The crowd was swaying in its own fake world. Well-known businessmen, society women smiling with their Botoxed faces, local politicians, they were all there. They were all enjoying this lavish party, financed by my sacrifices. And then, in the middle of the crowd, I saw them. Isabella was like a queen. She wore a sparkling, backless red dress. That dress, which I knew had been bought with my money, clung to her like snakeskin. A champagne glass in her hand, she glided from one group to another, laughing, relishing being the center of attention. Ricardo, on the other hand, seemed to be in her shadow. He was wearing an expensive suit, but it didn't seem to belong to him, as if he had borrowed it. He had a tense smile on his face. He was telling people around him things, trying to play the role of a successful businessman, but his eyes were constantly darting around, as if he was afraid of something, of someone. We stood in the shadows at the entrance for a few seconds. I wanted to savor that moment, their final, unsuspecting moments at the peak of their fake triumph. Then I slowly took a step forward. I stepped into the light. One of the socialite women was the first to notice. When she met my gaze, the smile froze on her face. Her eyes widened in shock. She nudged the person next to her. They looked at me, too. A wave of whispers began to spread through the crowd like a snake piercing the noise of the music. That's Ricardo's mother, isn't it? I thought she was in a nursing home. They said she was very ill. What's she doing here? The music seemed to be turned down by an invisible hand. The whispers gave way to a curious silence. And in that silence, Ricardo and Isabella turned to see what the crowd was looking at. I met Isabella's eyes first. That bright, fake smile remained frozen on her face. But her eyes. In her eyes, I saw first a momentary lack of recognition, then shock, then panic, and finally pure, unadulterated hatred. The hand holding her glass trembled slightly. Ricardo's reaction was completely different. The moment he saw me, all color drained from his face. He looked like he had seen a ghost. Guilt, fear, and perhaps, somewhere deep down, a momentary flash of shame passed over his face like a shadow. Isabella was the first to recover. Putting on a mask of anxious smiles, she began to push her way through the crowd towards me. Her intention was clear, to quietly escort me out before this scandal escalated. "Elena," she said when she reached me. Her voice was loud enough for those around us to hear, but it was filled with false compassion. "Darling, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be resting? Come on, let me take you home." She reached for my arm. I quickly pulled my arm away. My gaze locked with hers. My voice was calm enough for the whole room to hear, but just as sharp. "This is my home, Isabella, and I'm not going anywhere." The sentence hung in the air. This is my home. Those two words were a declaration of war. At that moment, phase 2 of the plan kicked in. Hector approached me with heavy, determined steps. Behind him were Commissioner Rodriguez and the other officers in their official uniforms, and behind them was Mr. Sterling, his face completely expressionless. The atmosphere at the party changed completely in that moment. The curious silence was replaced by an icy tension. Everyone held their breath, waiting for what would happen. The music had stopped completely. Isabella panicked when she saw the police and Sterling. What's going on here?" she stammered. Ricardo had also reached us. He was still as white as a sheet. "Mom, what are you doing?" he whispered. Hector stepped forward. He was now the focus of the entire room. He didn't need to raise his voice. His authority was enough to pierce the silence. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," he began. "My name is Hector Morales. I am the Vargas family's lawyer. I'm sorry to interrupt your little celebration, but there is an important legal matter that needs to be clarified." He paused, making sure he had everyone's undivided attention. "This property you see here," he said, gesturing toward the hall, "does not belong to Ricardo and Isabella Vargas." A murmur rose through the room. Isabella shrieked, "That's nonsense! We have the documents. The deed is ours." Hector smiled sarcastically. "The documents you have, ma'am, are nothing more than forged papers obtained through fraud. The true owner of this property is the Vargas Family Trust Fund, established 40 years ago by the late Mateo Vargas, to which my client, Elena Vargas, has a lifetime right of use." He lifted the burgundy folder in his hand. "The real documents are here, and according to these documents, there was only one condition for the transfer of ownership to Ricardo Vargas. His mother, Elena Vargas, had to declare that she was retiring of her own free will and happiness. However, by forcibly confining her to a nursing home, deceiving her, and seizing her property, you fundamentally violated this condition. What you did constitutes qualified fraud under the law." Each sentence was like a slap in the face to Ricardo and Isabella. Isabella's face was purple with rage. Ricardo looked as if he might collapse right there. Hector turned to Mr. Sterling to deliver the final blow. "Mr. Sterling, as Stonewall Properties, you had an agreement to purchase this property, correct?" Mr. Sterling took a step toward the crowd. His voice had the clear, ruthless tone of a CEO. "As Stonewall Properties, we regret to inform you that this evening we have learned we have been the victims of a serious title fraud. All agreements we made with Ricardo and Isabella Vargas are null and void from this moment on. Our company will initiate legal proceedings against them for compensation for the damages suffered and for this fraudulent attempt that has damaged our reputation." This was the beginning of the end. Not only had they lost the bakery, but they had also antagonized one of the city's most powerful companies. The crowd's reaction changed instantly. People who had been laughing and clinking glasses with them moments ago were now shunning them as if they had the plague. The whispers had turned into audible accusations and taunts. Phones were raised in the air, everyone recording this historic disgrace. Their social execution was being broadcast live. Isabella completely lost control. All that fake elegance fell away, revealing the ugly face of a greedy, immoral, cornered woman. She started shouting, waving her finger at me. You planned all this, didn't you? You senile old fool. You ruined our lives. You can't take what's ours." I walked towards her. There were only a few steps between us. I looked into her eyes, those hateful, desperate eyes. "You had nothing, Isabella," I said, keeping my composure. "All of this was a lie built on a stolen life. You stole my home, my husband's inheritance, and my son's soul." Then I turned to Ricardo. He couldn't look at me anymore. His eyes were downcast, his shoulders slumped like a child's. "Mom," he whispered. His voice trembled with regret and pain. "Mom, why?" It was the most painful question I had heard throughout this whole process. My eyes welled up for a moment, but I didn't let a single tear fall. "Because you," I said, my voice carrying all the weight of a mother's broken heart. "You sold your father's soul, carved into those butterflies, the life I dedicated to you, and most importantly, your own honor, for nothing, Ricardo, for this woman's gilded ambitions. Justice, that's what this is." When I finished speaking, Commissioner Rodriguez stepped forward. He had officially sealed papers in his hand. "Ricardo Vargas, Isabella Vargas," he said in an official cold voice. "Pursuant to the investigation initiated against you on charges of trespassing, aggravated fraud, and forgery, you must vacate this property. Immediately. This is an official eviction order." One of the officers thrust the papers into Ricardo's hand. That moment marked the end of their reign. The party was over. The dream was over. Only ruins remained. As the crowd rushed to the doors to escape this toxic environment as quickly as possible, Ricardo and Isabella were left alone in that huge, tasteless hall. Just a few minutes ago, they had been kings and queens at the center of their world. Now they were two outcasts, two criminals. Hector came to my side. "Let's go, Elena. We're done here." I nodded. I turned around and walked toward that door. I didn't look back even once. I didn't look at my shattered sign, my stolen money, my ruined dreams. I didn't look at my son's collapsed silhouette. When I stepped outside into the cool night air, I took a deep breath. The air filling my lungs was the cleanest, most liberating breath I had taken in weeks, in months. I looked up at the sky. I could make out a few faint stars piercing through the light of those fake projectors. The butterfly had retracted its wings, and now it was time to fly. Revenge is like a storm. It comes with a roar, destroys everything, burns everything, and leaves behind a deep silence. The morning after that night, after that magnificent collapse, began with just such a silence. As I watched outside from the window of the small, safe apartment Hector had rented for me, San Antonio was waking up to a new day. But for me, it was not just a new day. It was a new life. For the first time in years, I had woken up without the weight of a lifetime on my shoulders. Sipping my coffee, I looked at the morning newspaper lying on the table. The headline covered the entire front page. Above a photo of Ricardo and Isabella taken at the party, their faces wearing those fake, triumphant smiles, the headline was printed in huge letters: "Society Scandal, the Dark Side of the Baker's Kingdom, Son and Daughter-in-Law Accused of Defrauding Their Mother." As I read the news, I felt neither joy nor a triumphant cry. I only felt a weary sense of satisfaction that a painful task had been completed. Everything was written in the news. The confrontation at the party, Stonewall Properties' statement, the revelation that the rumors about me being old and sick were lies. Everyone reading the newspaper now knew the truth. My reputation, my honor, had been restored to me. Theirs, however, was forever tarnished. Hector came to visit me in the afternoon. He had the calm smile of a craftsman who had done his job well. He placed his briefcase on the table. "Good morning, General," he quipped. "The war is over. Now it's time for damage assessment." I poured him a coffee. "Tell me, Hector, what's the latest?" "A complete disaster," he said cheerfully. "For them, of course. Their bank accounts have been frozen by court order. Stonewall Properties, as promised last night, filed $1 million compensation lawsuit against them this morning. They were kicked out of that luxury apartment and those cars they rented last night. Credit cards canceled. They don't have a penny left." He paused, then continued. "And the best part, Isabella, in her first statement at the police station this morning, tried to pin all the blame on Ricardo. She spouted nonsense like, 'He tricked me. I didn't know anything. He was obsessed with his mother.' Apparently, their great love was shattered at the first storm. Isabella sold him out in a second to save her own skin. I wasn't surprised by this news. That was the kind of woman she was. But still, somewhere deep down, I felt a tiny twinge for Ricardo. The woman he had sold his entire life and honor for had tossed him aside like a rag at the first opportunity. Hector pulled a shiny new file out of his briefcase. From it, he extended a deed with official seals and a set of keys. "And this," he said, his voice softening, "is yours. The deed to La Mariposa Dorada. Officially yours again. And these are the keys to the house. When I took those keys in my hand, my fingers trembled. This wasn't just a piece of metal. This was my life, my past, my future, my freedom. I looked at Hector. My eyes were filled with tears. "Thank you, Hector," I whispered. "If it weren't for you—" He cut me off. "I didn't do anything, Elena. I just carried out Mateo's will. He was always one step ahead of you. Now go. Claim your home." That day, I returned to the bakery alone for the first time. I stood in front of the door and looked at that tasteless pink neon sign. Bella's Bites. That name no longer hurt me. It just seemed pitiful. When I inserted the key into the lock and turned it, I heard that familiar sweet creak. I pushed the door open and went inside. Inside, it was like a disaster zone. The abandoned party lay in ruins from the night before. Popped balloons, spilled drinks, overturned chairs, half-eaten expensive sofas. Everywhere bore the traces of their fake victories and sudden collapse. That familiar metallic smell of money was now mixed with stale champagne and disappointment. I knew what I had to do in that moment. This would be more than just cleaning. This was a purification ritual. I opened the windows wide. The fresh air that poured in slowly began to sweep out that artificial rotten smell. Then I got to work with the biggest trash bags I could find. I filled them, one by one, with everything that belonged to them: the tasteless decorations, the soulless furniture, the fake memories. This wasn't just about cleaning a space. It was about cleansing my soul, my life, of their invasion. I worked for hours, without stopping. I was drenched in sweat, my arms ached, but I had never felt so alive. Finally, when I placed the last trash bag belonging to them in front of the door, the bakery was completely empty. But it wasn't a bad emptiness. It was a clean emptiness, ready for new beginnings. My eye caught Mateo's old wooden counter, made with his own hands, which they hadn't even bothered to tear down. It was covered in dust and stains. I took a damp cloth and began to wipe it gently, lovingly. With each stroke of the cloth, the familiar texture of the wood, its warm color, reappeared. It was as if I were touching Mateo's soul. The next day, the workers Hector had found arrived. They removed those awful black marble slabs. Beneath them were the bakery's original rustic brick walls. They took down the cold, smoked glass windows. Sunlight flooded inside like it hadn't in years. And finally, with the help of a crane, they took down that pink neon sign, Bella's Bites. The loud metallic clang it made as it hit the ground was like a victory march to me. After the party, the detective found something in the rubble and brought it to me. The broken wooden remains of Mateo's original La Mariposa Dorada sign. I hadn't thrown them away. I found one of the city's best woodworkers. "Can you fix this?" I asked. The man looked at the pieces. "I can do better than repair it, ma'am," he said. "I'll give it new life." A week later, I experienced one of the hardest moments of my life. Ricardo came to the bakery. I didn't recognize him when I saw him at the door. Gone were the expensive suits, replaced by cheap, worn-out pants and a t-shirt. His beard had grown out, and his eyes were sunken. He was no longer a successful businessman, but a man defeated by life, a lost man. He didn't dare come inside. He stood in the doorway. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking. I looked at him. I felt neither anger nor hatred, only a deep, very deep sorrow. Sorrow for the son I had lost. "Isabella left," he said, averting his eyes from mine. "She abandoned me. She planned everything, Mom. I swear. She tricked me." I cut him off. In a calm but firm voice, I said, "No, Ricardo. No one deceived you. You made your own choices. You chose greed, ingratitude, getting rich the easy way. You chose to betray your father's legacy. You chose to cast aside your own mother. You cannot regain your honor by blaming someone else." Tears began to stream from his eyes. He collapsed to the ground, overcome with sobs. "I'm sorry, Mom," he moaned. "Please forgive me. I'm so sorry. I've lost everything." I went to him. But I didn't hug him. I just stood in front of him. "Your regret is a burden you must carry, Ricardo, not mine," I said, without a shred of hesitation in my voice. "As for you, I forgive the little boy who cried in my arms when his knees bled in that park. He was my son. But you are not that child. I cannot walk the same path with you. You must find your own path. You must rebuild your own honor from scratch with your own hands. It may take years, or you may never succeed. But this is your battle now." I waited for him to stand up. He looked at my face one last time, helplessly. He was searching for hope in those eyes. I didn't give him that hope, because that hope was something he had to find within himself. "Goodbye, Ricardo," I said. He turned his back and slowly walked away. As he left my street, my life, I knew that an era had come to a complete end. A month later, La Mariposa Dorada was reborn. That woodworker had worked wonders. He had joined the broken pieces of the sign together, pouring golden resin between them. The sign was now even more beautiful than before. Those golden veins symbolized how, just like my life, it had grown stronger from where it had been broken. On the day of the reopening, I didn't throw a party. I just opened the door and let the scent of freshly baked pan dolce waft out into the street. And people came. The whole neighborhood, old customers, new faces who recognized me from the newspapers, who respected my story. That day, the bakery was fuller than it had ever been. People came not just to shop, but to support me, to stand by me. That day, I realized that instead of losing one family member, I had gained a huge, loving family. But my story didn't end there. This was less an ending and more a new beginning. The pain I had experienced had transformed me into a wiser, stronger, and more compassionate person. I knew how many elderly people, like me, had been cast aside by their children, their voices unheard. I had heard their silent cries. Together with Hector, we established a foundation in Mateo's name, the Golden Butterfly Foundation. The foundation's purpose was simple: to provide free legal counseling and psychological support to elderly people who had suffered financial abuse or abandonment within their families. Part of the bakery's income and my own savings became the foundation's initial capital. My days were no longer spent just kneading dough. My small office behind the bakery had become a center of hope. There, I served coffee to elderly people who came in fearfully, ashamed, and I became not just a lawyer to them, but also a friend, a confidant. I told them, "You are not alone. You can fight. You are strong." I helped them mend their broken wings. One evening, after closing the shop, I sat alone behind the counter. The warmth from the oven, the scent of vanilla filling the air, and the wooden butterflies on the wall. Everything was in its place. But I was no longer the same woman. I was a woman who had survived that storm, who had even become that storm herself. My eyes fell on Mateo's young, smiling photo hanging on the wall. "We did it, mi amor," I whispered. "We didn't just reclaim our legacy. We grew it. We turned it into a beacon of hope." In that moment, I understood what true freedom meant. Freedom wasn't about revenge. Freedom was about forgiving, but not forgetting. Freedom was turning pain into purpose. Freedom was writing the ending of your own story with honor, love, and wisdom. And my story had a happy ending. Because happiness wasn't the storm stopping. It was the power to make your own garden bloom again after the storm. And my garden was blooming more beautifully than ever before.